All right, welcome back. This is Unit 5, God Chooses Israel. And so today we're going to be talking about Lesson 22. And Lesson 22 is titled Key Event, the Exodus. Once again, I know I say this almost every class, but really, as we're studying these things, remember everybody knows about the Exodus. This is stuff that you guys have talked about for years and years and years. And so you know about the Exodus. So we're not going to go into great detail about any one particular thing. And in fact, I'm deviating a little bit from the book just because I want to go into some details that maybe the book didn't go into. So the first thing about the Exodus, remember that based upon dates, and really we look at First Kings chapter 6 and verse 1 with uh, the chronology of what's going on. And so, based on that, knowing when Solomon reigned, David, and Saul, we trace it back based upon those years. And so, most scholars date Exodus to around 1446. The funny thing about it is, there's actually two dates that are mentioned there's an early date and there's a late date. 1446 is considered the early date. The other date that's thrown out is around 1200. I personally believe it's more the 1446, and I'll explain why and give you some evidence of that. So I believe it was the earlier date of 1446, not the later date in the 1200 BCs. So if it did happen in 1446, then that would have meant that Amenhotep II would have been Pharaoh. The book doesn't go into this detail, and this isn't on your quiz, but I did want you to know that Amenhotep II would have been Pharaoh had this happened in 1446. What the reason why I believe that it is Amenhotep is because what's interesting is that if you go back and you study the archaeological evidence, Egyptian records indicate that all of a sudden there weren't a lot of military actions in 1446, which makes sense if you believe the Bible, because in Exodus 14 verse 28, what happened to Pharaoh's army? They all drowned in the Red Sea. His successor, Thutmose IV, he was not his true heir. This was not his firstborn son. This is not the person who should have been heir. And so once again, we think about the plagues. What happened to Amenhotep's, if it was Amenhotep, what happened to his firstborn son? He would have died with the plague, the last plague, death of the firstborn. So once again, this kind of builds a case to believe that this could have been Amenhotep. I will give one reason why a lot of people say that it's not. When you read Psalm 136, verse 15, it talks about how Pharaoh died in the Red Sea. Amenhotep II, or Amenhotep II, didn't die in 1446. And so, if you believe that Pharaoh died in the flood, or the flood, died in the Red Sea, then this would prove that it wasn't Amenhotep II. But this is the only place it talks about Pharaoh dying. And really, in a sense, remember, Psalms is all poetry. So it could have been poetic in him saying that his power died, the army died, even his belief that he was a god may have died at that point. So once again, I still believe that it was Amenhotep II that we're talking about here in this as we think about the Exodus. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. The Bible doesn't name exactly who the Pharaoh was, and Egyptian records aren't going to say that. In Psalm 109, verse 15, it talks about how God is going to cut off the name of his enemies. And so I believe that it's intentional that the Pharaoh is not named because God is showing his power and saying that, look, you're not even worth my time remembering your name. And so, like I said, am I saying that it has to be Amenhotep II? No. Did the evidence suggest that? I believe so, but just giving you some more information, and you can decide for yourself which one you believe it is. We're not going to cover each of the 10 plagues specifically. Once again, you know these things, we know what the plagues are. But I think it's interesting when you think about the plagues, they each show God's power over the Egyptian gods. Every single plague attacked at least one Egyptian god, oftentimes multiple ones. You remember that the Egyptian magicians, say that three times fast, the Egyptian magicians were able to replicate the first three plagues, and I think that was intentional on God's part. By the time the fourth plague came around, the plague of lice, you remember in Exodus 8 and verse 19, the magicians even say, "This is the finger of God." They even recognize that they can't do this, and so this has to be the power of another God, not their gods. They can't do this. And so once again, it's just showing God's power. So I think that was intentional so that Egypt couldn't come back and say, "Oh, well, we can," it really leads to that fact of it hardened Pharaoh's heart. And so they were able to replicate the first three through their trickery. But then by the time of the fourth plague, they realized, and from all intents for everything in the Bible, it seems like they couldn't do any of the other ones either. So after the fourth plague on, they couldn't replicate what was going on. Remember, after the tenth plague, the death of the firstborn, Pharaoh finally allows the people to leave, and the parting of the Red Sea, allowing Israel to pass over dry land, drowning the Egyptians. This would have once again just been such a huge display of God's magnificence, of his power, him proving once and for all that the Egyptians were not the most powerful nation. They weren't the most powerful people. He has control over everything. All right. So I'll go ahead and give you your second bonus word at this point. So your second bonus word is Onesimus. Onesimus. He is from Philemon. He is the slave that ran away from Philemon. And so that's going to be your second bonus word for your quiz. The Exodus is such a pivotal story for Israel. It shows them marching to Mount Sinai to receive the law. It signifies their first steps as a nation. Remember that over 600,000 men were counted as they left. So it's well within the realm of possibility that we had over between 1 and 2 million people who were crossing over the Red Sea, who left from Egypt. And of course, there's the spiritual lessons of it. To Christians, this foreshadows God's freeing us from being slaves of sin. We learn about the penalties of grumbling, complaining, disobedience from Israel as they leave Egypt. Uh, Jesus, of course, is our Passover. Just as they celebrated the Passover, Jesus is our Passover. And then page 108 of your book, I like the way it says this. The call still serves as a beacon for those who want to escape spiritual slavery and the freedom of a new identity as God's people. So that's what the Exodus represents to us. So this is your second video. I'll be uploading a third one shortly.